Okay, so this is a video that I'm going to make in which a series of them I walk through the various different geographic locales, the world divided into four parts, and just merely give you an opportunity to simply watch a video and hopefully pick up some stuff that will earn you points. And so today we're going to start with the continent of Africa. Just as an overview, before I zoom in, you have the northern part dominated by the Sahara and the Atlas Mountains, of course, right up here. I'll talk about them in just a second. Then there's this line, roughly right in here somewhere, that represents what is known as the Sahel, which is the division where no longer is it desert, but into a part of the central part of Africa, which is going to be much more tropical, obviously, all along the equator. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin over here in East Africa, in the northeast, actually, work my way across the northern part and then come over to East Africa, work my way across then the Sahel, and then move down into the lower part, talking about various different countries, aspects about them, lakes, rivers, mountain ranges, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start up in, like I said, in the northeast. So, particularly when you're learning a continent, make sure that you are familiarizing not only where things are, but particularly, the first thing you need to do is get down all of your country's capitals. So here we're going to begin in the Atlas Mountains. The Atlas Mountains are a tall mountain range that dominates this area of the continent, and there is a sub-range that comes up often in Quizbowl questions called the Toubkal. And here you can see Jebel Toubkal, which is a particular mountain in that sub-range of the Atlas Mountains. So knowing that obviously will earn you some points. So Algeria is one of, if not the largest country by area in Africa, and it used to be a part of the French country until in the 1950s it obviously broke away. The probably most famous author of Algeria is Camus, C-A-M-U-S, who, of course, wrote The Stranger, in which you have the character of Meursault shooting an Arab on the beach. And that is, of course, on the occasion of his mother's funeral or mother's death. All of northern Africa that you see here is dominated by the religion Islam, and they are Arabic-speaking countries for the most part. You also have Morocco, which is right here, that claims the Western Sahara that wants to be an independent country. Morocco's capital, just as Algiers is for Algeria, Morocco's capital is that of Rabat. But I would argue that its most famous cities are not going to be the capital Rabat, but rather Marrakesh and, of course, Casablanca of the famed movie from the 1940s. Moving across to the west, you have the country of Tunisia. This is, of course, where you would have the modern-day site of Carthage right along its coast, and its capital is that of Tunis. The Arab Spring, which was a series of revolutionary uprisings, pro-democracy revolutionary uprisings in the 2010, starting in around 2010, actually began in Tunisia, in which a person set themselves on fire in protest of Persia's, or I should say Tunisia's leader at the time. We then move into Libya, which is a country that felt very much the changes of the Arab Spring. Its capital is, of course, Tripoli, but also Benghazi, which is the place where a set of American diplomats were killed following the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi. For Africa, if that is your assigned part of the world, I very much encourage you to go to NAQT's You Gotta Know, and there are two things that are of great help. You gotta know these African bodies of water, and you gotta know these 20th century African leaders, upon which you will find Muammar Gaddafi. He's the leader of the 20th century for Libya, and he is noted for writing a green book in which it was kind of like a guide for life. The country at the time had a flag that was only solid green. Since his toppling in the Arab Spring, no longer is it just all green. And he was indeed killed in that Arab Spring. And now Libya is in many ways a failed state, kind of a lawless place because of no centralized governmental authority keeping everything in check, as it were. We move over into then Egypt. In Egypt, there, of course, you have noted the domination of the Nile River, along the banks of which on either side with the regularized flooding makes for rather fertile land. Even to this day, Egyptian cotton is some of the finest in the world, and it was known as the breadbasket of the Roman Empire after it was essentially taken over by the Emperor Augustus following his defeat of Cleopatra. It was the personal property of the emperor at the time, instead of obviously becoming an province like it normally would. Note down at the bottom you have Lake Nasser. That is created by the Aswan High Dam. You see here the city of Aswan, and named after Gamal Nasser, who was leader of Egypt in the 1950s up until his death in 1970. The history of Egypt over the last 70 years or so is readily understood in Quizbowl terms in the names of several people. I'm going to go through them really quickly. You have, obviously, Nasser, who leads the Arab contingency in the Six-Day War against Israel over here. Upon his death in 1970, you have Anwar Sadat, who is the leader through the 1970s up into his death until, I think, 1981, in which you got Hosni Mubarak. Hosni Mubarak is, of course, just like Gaddafi was in Libya, taken down in the Arab Spring, and lots of protest in Tahrir Square in Cairo, the capital of Egypt, led to Sadat's ouster. After that, you had Mohammed Morsi, who was obviously the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, a political organization that had been suppressed for years and years under those three fellows of Nasser, Sadat, and Mubarak. But he has since then been toppled, and I think now it might be El-Sisi. But of course, the longer this video goes on, the more that would become out of date. Up towards the mouth of the Nile River, you have obviously Giza, where the pyramids and the Sphinx are located, and of course the city of Alexandria, which is so important in ancient history as well. The most famous author from Egypt that comes up is Mahfouz, Naguib Mahfouz, who has a set of 3 novels called his Cairo Trilogy, and so it is important to, of course, take note of that. So, also please note the Suez Canal, which along here, and there's the Suez Crisis, something that, again, if Africa is your area, you should become familiar with it, which, of course, took place, I think, in the 1950s. So, what we'll do is we'll just go and back across over to the east again and make our way across. You have, of course, the country of Mauritania, which has its capital Nouakchott. That's really all you need to know for it. And then we move to Mali. Now, when it comes to Mali, obviously, you should be familiar with medieval or ancient Mali with, of course, Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire, among others. Sundiata, but that's the sort of stuff you'll learn in world history, as it were. But all through Mali, you have obviously the most important river of Eastern Africa, which is the Niger. It goes through both Mali's capital of Bamako, as well as its namesake country's capital, Niger, of Niamey, that you have there, until it goes then into Nigeria, also taking its name from the Niger River. Then it flows, obviously, to the Gulf of Guinea, which is that part of the Atlantic that has all of these countries, obviously, all along its coast. Please make note as well of the countries here along the far eastern coast of Africa. You have Senegal with its capital Dakar, and Senegal completely enwraps around the Gambia with its capital at Banjul. You then have Guinea-Bissau and Guinea, known obviously Bissau for the name of its country's capital, Bissau, and of course Guinea here with Conakry. Now, of particular note, you have down here Sierra Leone and Liberia. Both of these countries, essentially in their modern form, are established as a place for Black people. Sierra Leone, Black people who had been in the UK, who come down and establishes it. That's why its capital is known as Freetown. And Liberia, which is, of course, populated originally by many former U.S. slaves, has its capital at Monrovia, which takes its name from James Monroe, the, of course, president at around that time. Going along here, next to Mali, right below it, you have, obviously, Burkina Faso with its capital of Ouagadougou. And then below that, you have Côte d'Ivoire, which is the Ivory Coast, but it is, of course, no longer referred to by that, but rather instead Côte d'Ivoire with its capital of Yamoussoukro. But I also have heard in the past that Abidjan is kind of like a co-capital, but that might be wrong. By the way, these maps date from 2012. I got them out of the 2012 World Almanac, and so therefore there are going to be particular parts, especially when we get over here to Sudan, that is going to be somewhat outdated. Now, then you have, of course, Ghana with its capital of Accra. Here you can see that Lake Volta is created out of the river that is here, and the person who is heavily responsible for it is the Prime Minister of Ghana when it gains its independence. It used to be known as the Gold Coast, and again, you got to know these 20th century African leaders, it's Kwame Nkrumah. You should read up about him as he come up frequently in Quizbowl. You have, of course, Togo with its capital of Lomé, a long country. The same with then Benin with its capital at Porto Novo. That brings us then to the most populous country, and you can see where it is located in all of Africa, and that is, of course, the country of Nigeria. It is home to the Nollywood film industry. So in, of course, India, you have Bollywood. In the United States, the original Hollywood. And in, of course, Nigeria, you have Nollywood. That, of course, is located in its largest city by far, that of Lagos, which is noted for its oil industry all around this delta that you see here. This region right here in the late 1960s tried to break off as an independent region or country, and it is known as Biafra in Nigeria, and of course the Igbo people or Igbo people that you find in Things Fall Apart. The two most famous authors that come from Nigeria are, of course, going to be Chinua Achebe, who wrote Things Fall Apart, as well as its sequel, No Longer at Ease, as well as others. He criticized Joseph Conrad's writings, especially in Heart of Darkness, for being innately racist. And then also from Nigeria, you have Wole Soyinka that comes up at the high school level, whose most famous work, I would think, is The Lion and the Jewel. The capital of Nigeria is not its largest city, Lagos, but instead Abuja that you see here. Nigeria is the location of Boko Haram, a rather terrorist group that is very much against Western education and that sort of thing. It is associated with radical Islamists. And then also for when it comes to Nigeria, you should become familiar with its rather recent rulers, particularly those dealing with Boko Haram, and only about within the last 10 years, the horrible, horrible kidnapping of 300 girls who were just simply trying to gain their education. But at any rate, you also have, going back all the way to the 1990s, Sani Abacha, as well as other sorts of leaders that are noted for an incredibly important country on the continent. Then we move over to Chad, which, of course, has as its capital N'Djamena, close to, of course, its namesake lake, Lake Chad. And please note about Lake Chad, it has been shrinking tremendously. The original outline that you see here, that my mouse is following along, is what it would have been only as much as maybe 60 years ago. And so it has continued to shrink for a whole variety of reasons. And I would certainly encourage you to simply go quickly Wikipedia Lake Chad and find out what's going on with it, because it comes up quite often in Quizbowl. Since we're down here in this Gulf of Guinea, I thought we should go ahead and talk about Cameroon with, of course, its capital Yaoundé. You have over here Equatorial Guinea, which is this little island, and that part on the mainland. The island has its capital Malabo. Out here you have Sao Tome and Principe, which is a offshore kind of island country. And then, of course, you have Gabon with Libreville, literally free village or free land. All right, so before going on to the Congo, I will go a little bit more north as well. And while I'm thinking about it, I just want to point out a couple of things. Is that I should have talked about it already when I was up here, but you have the famous Madeira Islands as controlled by Portugal, as the same way that the Azores are. You can see the Azores up here, a set of islands that many people would have passed over in the age of exploration coming over to the New World. And then controlled by Spain, you have the Canary Islands, which are incredibly popular as a series of tourist destinations. Before I move on again, I failed to talk about Gibraltar and the Straits of Gibraltar and the Rock of Gibraltar, which is, of course, the mouthway into the Atlantic from or into the Mediterranean that you see there. So let's go back to where we had been and move across now to the Central African Republic, of course, imaginatively named with its capital of Bangui that is there. So we move more so into the east and now talk about Sudan. Now, Sudan, of course, this is a map from 2012, no longer now, or not yet, has the break-off republic and now independent country of South Sudan that has its capital at Juba. The recent history of Sudan was that within the last 15 years, Omar Bashir was very much engaged in questionable activities of genocide and the like against the people in the South. But at any rate, another thing to go and quickly Wikipedia and read on, and it will gain you points. Now, you will see that in Sudan, you have the White Nile, which is making its way from Lake Victoria down here. And then, of course, the Blue Nile, which makes its way from Lake Tana. That is a very much popular clue in Quizbowl questions. Lake Tana, the source of the Blue Nile. They come together at Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, whereupon, obviously, it combines into the Nile River that we have here until all the way up to Lake Nasser. But again, Sudan quite involved in recent history. That brings us then over to Eritrea and Ethiopia. Eritrea and Ethiopia had been involved in a war within the last 40 years or so, 50 years or so. But now Eritrea is its own independent country, no longer controlled. It takes its name from the Red Sea because the Red Sea is originally known as the Erythraean Sea. And that word erythros in Greek means red. And so that's why it was called that. And that's why Eritrea. Also, red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. And so that's something to obviously to be noted there as well. The capital of Ethiopia is Addis Ababa that one sees right here. And of the Ethiopian leaders, the ones to know, it is, of course, on that same list. You got to know this 20th century leaders. That would, of course, be Haile Selassie, or Tafari, as in Ras Tafari. And he, of course, was deposed by an Italian invasion and deposition in 1936, but he regained the throne of Ethiopia in 1941, I think it was. Ethiopia also is the place to where there have been a break-off group fighting, and so it is on the, shall we say, precipice of perhaps civil war. I forget the exact name of the group, but nevertheless, it is something that would come up in clues as it is going on right now. Also, by chance, Ras Tafari, that being Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, he is worshipped as a kind of messianic figure by the religion Rastafarianism, and that's why it takes its name, which is rather popular, obviously, in Jamaica. But at any rate, you then have over here Djibouti with its capital Djibouti, and then on the Horn of Africa you have Somalia. Somalia is noted, much like Libya, as being somewhat of a chaotic and failed state in the last decades or so. That is the location of the Al-Shabaab terror group. So in Nigeria you have Boko Haram, in Somalia you have Al-Shabaab. And they cause all kinds of problems, as they did about 10 years ago or so in Kenya with an attack on a mall that is there. But at any rate, the coast of Somalia over the last, shall we say, several years is dominated by lawlessness, and therefore it is a haven for piracy. And in the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu, is where you have the origin of the Black Hawk Down incident, which in the 1990s, several U.S. servicemen were killed horrifically when, again, their Black Hawk helicopter went down. And so, therefore, that is Somalia. All along in this whole area here, in the 1980s, there was a horrific, just terrible, terrible famine that I remember images from my childhood. So there is that as well to hopefully remember and know if it comes up in Quizbowl. So let's deal with now the countries that are down here that you have in the Lake District, the Great Lakes of Africa. So first, we have Kenya, that is home to, of course, the mountain Mount Kenya of its same name. Kenya is, of course, the location of Lake Turkana that you see right here. That's included in, you got to know, these African bodies of water. And it is, of course, ruled from Nairobi. Lots and lots of recent history when it comes to Kenya about, obviously, people in elections, election disagreements. The most recent election featured two people that were descendants directly from Jomo Kenyatta, who, of course, is the first independent ruler of Kenya. And then the other character, who I do not remember their name, but was the political rival. And so their descendants are now political rivals as well. But Kenya, an incredibly important country and one that comes up quite often. Mombasa, this port city on Kenya, often comes up as a clue for Kenya being obviously the answer. Kenya is one of several countries that we'll name that lie on Lake Victoria, the huge lake that is noted for several things, including its variety of cichlids. But many of those have obviously been depleted when the very, very predatory Nile perch was introduced into Lake Victoria, named after, obviously, the British Queen during the time of a great deal of colonialism in Africa. And you can see right on the other side of Uganda, you have Lake Albert. And so let's talk about Uganda. Uganda obviously has that northern coastline of Lake Victoria, governed from Kampala. But in the 20th century, you got to know these 20th century African leaders. You have, of course, Idi Amin, sometimes referred to as the butcher of East Africa, with all of the horrific things that he did. You also have in Uganda the Entebbe airport incident that involved some terrorists hijacking a plane, and of course the events that went on at Entebbe. So definitely stuff to obviously go and look up now. And a clue very often for Uganda and Idi Amin is that he replaced Milton Obote. He was the character. And if you're just looking to watch a good movie and maybe learn a little bit, watch The Last King of Scotland, in which the actor Forrest Whitaker portrays Idi Amin. Nevertheless, you move on to the south of Uganda, to Rwanda, the site of the absolutely horrific 1994 Rwandan genocide between the Tutsis and the Hutus, two ethnic groups that were heavily influenced by the Belgians. And it finally bubbled to the surface in 1994, in which 400,000 people were just absolutely slaughtered in genocide. And they are still recovering from the effects of that. Hotel Rwanda is a great movie to watch about this event as well. It's a great movie, and obviously you learn quite a bit from it. South of Rwanda, you have Burundi, with its capital of Bujumbura. And then you have Tanzania. Tanzania has capital of Dodoma, but also Dar es Salaam that you see over here on the coast. And, of course, the Zanzibar Islands for Tanzania as well. That's why the Zan in Tanzania is the same as Zanzibar. That, of course, Zanzibar Island has Zanzibar on it. You have the highest point in Africa in Tanzania, Mount Kilimanjaro that you see here, as well as Mount Meru, another famous and important mountain. The western coast, or the western side of Tanzania, is right along the Rift Valley, and you have there Lake Tanganyika. There is more water in Lake Tanganyika than Lake Victoria because of its great, great depth. It's in the middle of that rift. And actually, there's only one lake in the entire world that is deeper than Lake Tanganyika, and that is, of course, Lake Baikal in Russia. And then you have Lake Nyasa right down to the south of Tanzania as well. But Tanzania comes up quite a bit. So let's now talk about the most dominating river of all of Central Africa, two of them particularly, and that would be, of course, the Congo. Here is the Congo, as you can see, stretching all the way through its namesake country, which, of course, is the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, not to be confused with the Republic of the Congo, but you can just refer to the DRC as the Congo. Of course, you got to know these 20th century African leaders. Mobutu Sese Seko was a ruler of the Congo, and I think in his time it was named no longer Congo, but had previously in the 20th century been named Zaire. And so that is something to be noted as well. Along the Congo River, you have, of course, the Boyamba Falls. And then as it curls around into the north, it comes along to where you have, and I think that it is here, you have the Malebo Pool, although I could be wrong. But essentially it splits the two countries' capitals of Republic of Congo, Brazzaville. Sometimes it's known as Congo Brazzaville. And then on the other side, Kinshasa, the capital of Congo that is there. And so great importance is the Congo. And it is in the Congo that obviously you have the whole horrible, horrible thing with Belgian colonialism and Leopold II and the way that he treated the natives that were there and so forth and so on. But we move on in the interest of time. So, by the way, when you're looking over here at, of course, Tanzania and Kenya, this is what most people think of when they think of Africa, that kind of idea of Sahara or Safari Africa in the Serengeti Plain that, of course, is located there. But we move on to the south of that incredibly important country of the Congo, to Angola with its capital Luanda. And I think I could be mistaken, they are Portuguese speaking due to colonialism. And then, of course, Zambia with its capital of Lusaka. Zambia, like Congo, takes its name from the Zambezi River, which you can see all along here, which, of course, includes Victoria Falls. If you have never seen Victoria Falls, go and look it up. A magnificent set of falls, of course, again, named for the British monarch. And it is around in this area, as it were, or it could be maybe Lake Tanganyika, I think it would. But it reminded me, you see, you have Livingstone down here, in which David Livingstone was an explorer from England or UK, came down here and was going all about in the 1800s. And so, of course, Stanley, another English explorer, or I should say Scottish explorer, I think, comes down to look for him and encounters a fellow exiting from some sort of a house or hut and simply says, Dr. Livingstone, I presume, because he had been the only native African that he had seen, European fellow, for quite a while. But nevertheless, you then have the Zambezi River continuing all the way north of Zimbabwe. I'll talk about it in just a moment, through Mozambique until it comes to the ocean. Mozambique's capital, is down in its south, actually south of the Limpopo River, which is one of the most important rivers along with the Orange in South Africa. But there's the Limpopo, and its capital is Maputo. But going back up here to, obviously, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, it used to be the site of the longtime 20th century ruler of Zimbabwe, which was, of course, Robert Mugabe, who died in just 2019 in Singapore, I think, as he had been sent into exile after his long rule. Zimbabwe used to be known as Rhodesia, for the white settlers naming it there after Cecil Rhodes, the fellow who was so involved in African colonialism and is the namesake, obviously, of the Rhodes Scholarship as well. So we're almost done. Hang in there. Between Mozambique, and of course, Madagascar is the Mozambique Channel. Madagascar over here has capital Antananarivo and is noted for the location of lemurs. It's the only place that you can find them for the most, and also for the production of vanilla. It is the world's leading production of vanilla, as it were, which is a rather labor-intensive, I don't know if it's referred to as a spice, but flavoring agent, as it were. You also have Comoros, which is a little island nation off the coast of Mozambique, with its capital of Moroni that you can see there. Now, we move on into, obviously, Botswana. Botswana has, in the middle of it, the Kalahari Desert, but also this river that you see here is called the Okavango. And instead of dumping into the ocean like almost all other rivers do, it creates the Okavango Delta, which just springs up after the wet season and creates this huge wetland that is just teeming with life and fantastic. But at any rate, that is Botswana with its capital, as you can see down here, Gaborone, as it were. Now, to the west of Botswana is Namibia, whose, of course, capital name you can see is going to be from the influence of the colonialists from Europe, Windhoek. And this little stretch right here, so that Namibia could have access to the Zambezi River, and as the Caprivi Strip, named after a German politician, the Caprivi Strip, as it were. And then that leads us down to South Africa. South Africa, obviously, is the locale of the turn of the century, 19th into 20th century, Boer Wars between UK colonialists and Afrikaners, which were Dutch, essentially. And you have, of course, the terrible legacy of the 20th century of apartheid, in which the white minority suppressed and just absolutely discriminated against in every possible way. That's much too light of a word, against the native South Africans in a systematic way. You have the Drakensberg Mountains into the south that you have here. You have the Limpopo River, and of course you have the Orange River, where you get, of course, the namesake of the Orange Free State. Kimberley also is an important city, as it gives its name to a type of rock called kimberlite, which is the rock in which you will find diamonds. And so there is a rather active diamond industry in this area of the world. South Africa has 3 capitals. You have capital Pretoria, you have capital Cape Town, and you have capital Bloemfontein. I don't know why it's not lit up, but it necessarily functions as such. And its most famous city and important city is that of Johannesburg, outside of which you have Soweto, which is a suburb where you had the Soweto uprisings in protest, of course, of that terrible, terrible system called apartheid, as it were. They finally emerged out of that in the 1990s, in which, following the presidency of F.W. de Klerk, you finally had coming out of jail after 28 years, Nelson Mandela. Of course, he had first gone into jail in the Rivonia trial, and he gave the famous speech, "I am prepared to die." And then, of course, in that island, Robben Island, was imprisoned for 28 years, but emerged in the 1990s and ran successfully with the ANC, the African National Congress, which still dominates South Africa. South Africa's leaders, as of recent, are important to know as well, and they have been in the news and so forth and so on. So it would be worthwhile to go and look them up rather briefly. Contained completely within South Africa are 2 countries, the of course, country of Lesotho, which is Maseru, and you have here Eswatini, used to be known as Swaziland, but again, this map is outdated, and so you have its capital of Mbane and Labamba, but Eswatini is what it is now. Durban is an important area in South Africa as well, and South Africa is also not only the home to Nelson Mandela, but also winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Desmond Tutu, an Anglican priest in the 1980s, again, as an activist against apartheid. But I think, if I'm not wrong, F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid ruler of South Africa, and Mandela might have shared the Nobel Peace Prize, but I could have been wrong. But hopefully, and by the way, South Africa has a rich, rich literary history. Lots and lots of questions in Quizbowl about Nadine Gordimer with July's People. Again, you have apartheid at its center. Arthur Jarvis is a character who comes up. You have Alan Paton, Cry the Beloved Country. That is the name of Alan Paton's most famous book. And of course, Coetzee, J.M. Coetzee, who wrote Life and Times of Michael Kay, amongst others. There are probably other South African authors as well that come up in Quizbowl, but those are the 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. Nadine Gordimer, July's People, Alan Paton, Cry the Beloved Country, and J.M. Coetzee, who come up quite a bit. But there it is. Africa, I did not go over it in its completeness, but hopefully enough to where you're a little bit more familiar with the continent. Make yourself some flashcards. At a minimum, learn the country's capitals, and it will be of great benefit. So let's see how long this was. 30 minutes. You can play it on double time, replay it on double time, 15 minutes, and it's a good African review. So you got to know these African leaders, 20th century. You got to know these African bodies of water. So hopefully you go and do that. Good luck. Keep studying.